Hello, and welcome to Best Story Wins. I'm Josh RITCHIE, and I'm here with Jason LANKOW, my co-host. And today our guest is Justin Rands, the Director of Brand Design at Oyster. So, Justin, you are the Director of Brand Design at Oyster. Can you give us a little overview of your company and what your day-to-day looks like, and also what makes it unique?
Yeah, for sure. Super happy to be here, by the way. You guys are awesome. I've listened to some of your stuff before, and I'm happy to be here. Yeah, Oyster is super fun. We're a global employment platform, and we empower companies everywhere to employ talent anywhere. A strategic and trusted partner for hiring. So if you're looking to hire someone in India or Georgia or wherever, we're kind of that person in between that handles visa stuff, paperwork, payment, just your trusted partner there. Um, and yeah, I've been here over almost 2 years. It's super fun. We don't have an office. We're fully distributed all over the world, so that's fun. It's also challenging. It offers its own unique problems, but uh, overall, we've been doing super well. And for being so young, we're killing it.
How long have
That's
you guys been
great.
around?
Started right before the pandemic hit. So the pandemic kind of fueled our growth in the beginning because everyone had to work from home. That's when all this working from home, remote work hit, and our company went from here just up as fast as possible. Um, so it really enabled us to grow at a hyper speed. And now the economy is slowing down, and we're starting to see like people aren't willing to pay as much, and there's a lot of economic stuff happening. But I was able to jump in right at the beginning there and take off with it, which is amazing.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I remember when I first came across your brand sometime in 2020, I remember seeing what you were working on and thinking, wow, what a quick, smart move. But it's interesting to hear that you guys were already working on this, and then it was more of like a right place, right time situation. Um, but yeah, you just, with your answer there, kind of took me back a couple years.
Yeah, it was a dark time. I had just had a kid, and I was at a previous company, Intercom. I wasn't ready to leave yet. And then 6 months later, Jack, the co-founder, Jack Murdoch, had hit me up again, like, "Hey, we really would love to join." And remote work was like not going anywhere. And so I kind of took the jump. The brand was in this place that seemed like a good time to come in and change things. And they kind of gave me the keys to the car, and off I went.
Wow, that's awesome. So could you tell us a little bit about, I know you touched on this already in terms of where you were at before Oyster, but could you tell us a little bit about your career trajectory, kind of how you maybe first identified that you wanted to have a career in creative and kind of what the early part of that journey looked like?
Yeah, for sure. Both my parents are graphic designers.
Wow.
So pre-internet, they were bringing home books, just like big, thick books of ads. We had them laying around the house constantly. Once the internet started, like that, just me leafing through advertisements and like having a feeling that the advertisement gave me stuck with me somehow. Like I just still think about it. Um, I wanted to be a journalist. I got into art. I've always been creative. Both parents were really creative. And so after I went to San Francisco and tried to be a journalist, I realized it wasn't for me. I started getting more into art, into graffiti, into the culture of the city, skateboarding, wanted to be a musician. I think everybody at a certain point wants to do that. And then it was like the recession hit. There wasn't a lot out there for me, and I had to really focus on something that stuck with me. So like I had been doing art for friends, for bands and stuff, the skateboarding, graffiti, drawing, and so I just was like, okay, this makes sense. This has a feeling that stuck with me since childhood. But after that, with the recession, like it was just hard. So I focused in on how can I get into tech, which wasn't even really a thing back in 2008, 9. And I took when I was living in New York with my now wife, there was a front end class through General Assembly. Shout out General Assembly. Um, that I did some front end dev classes for 6 months or so. And that paired with I was working at a skate/flower shop in Brooklyn, which of course I was doing their website work and some skate graphics. So I was getting experience there. I was working in coffee, which of course I was too. And then I got in at some like sports tech startup called Crossover, doing like basic UI work, which at that point it was taking wireframes printed and then digitizing them with some of the components that they and the system they had. And that was like how things started off. But it was also, I had this like rich history of like illustration and layout and things, even animation I was tinkering around with at times that like paired together made me really hireable. And then I sort of took off from there and I started working at startups, moved back to San Francisco, got into an agency. I can go on and on, but it's been not pretty like straight up trajectory. It's been kind of jumping from UI UX to like front end dev to brand designer to art director to now like director of brand design at this 700 person company. I have to look up every day like how the fuck did this happen? But yeah, that's just a snippet of what I've gone through, and I've had some good mentors, some hard times in agency life. If y'all have been through agencies, it could, you know, chew you up and spit you out, but it gives you a good understanding of strategy and working with really talented people and thinking through the problems really in depth before you even start designing. And a level of like hardness to you that you need to like, when you get feedback, it doesn't affect you as much just because you've been through the ringer so much. So yeah, all that stuff has sort of set me up to be somewhat okay at my job.
Oh, that's really cool. I love the stories that kind of sound a little bit meandering. I think those are the most interesting, and maybe they're the most interesting to me because our story, Jason and myself and our other co-founder, is kind of like that as well. I wanted to go back to something that you mentioned there in the beginning of your answer. So I can probably count on one hand the number of people that I know whose parents were graphic designers, like pre-internet, and you had two parents that were, which sounds so cool, right? And I'm curious, like, did they, as designers, did they push you as a kid to do what they were doing, or was it more of like this thing that they were like, if you want to do it, you can do it, and you just kind of happened to end back up where you started, so to speak? Or could you talk us through that?
Yeah, they never pushed anything on me. I think they just wanted to be, I mean, if you're lucky to live in a household that's like open like that, um, with creative parents, then they would have just let me go in which way I wanted to. But it was being around those advertisements, going to the office occasionally. They worked at Terry Hines Advertising. It was this big place in LA for a while. They did billboards for Warner Brothers. And so my dad would, I guess this is a good point. Like my dad would come home and be like, yo, like here's a new Batman poster. And at that point it was like, oh, posters, like as you're a kid, I'm putting stuff up on my walls. Like all that stuff is really resonating with me. And so for my dad to be like, I made this and like you can see this off the freeway, it was like, oh shit, like this is huge. Like this is magic, and it's like that magic feeling that stuck with me. And then, seeing the perks of going in backlots, just the Hollywood hoo-ha that comes along with working in that industry, I thought was really interesting and connected me to pop culture in a way that I wasn't really getting. I was in the San Fernando Valley, and as close as I went to LA, I didn't have a car. I was young, so like that was just, it kind of made me feel like it was bigger than it was. But yeah, they work late nights. There was a lot of like Cork Express work up on the computer on our first Mac at home. They had like old, I think, Lacy drives with all their files on them that they plug in, and I'd see my dad working it sometimes if he had to work from home. And I was on the computer anyways. I was on AOL. I was dicking around online, so that stuff it's a blessing and a curse. It's never gone away. I'm still on the computer, so it's just I've always been on that same trajectory a little bit. It's just kind of taken me a while. It took me a while to like figure out like, okay, I think I can do this.
I love what you said there about it feeling like magic. That those feelings, especially of early day computing. I there was a video swirling around a couple weeks ago of I think it was like an old ET segment or Entertainment Tonight segment
Hmm.
where they were interviewing the guy who did the intro music for Seinfeld, and he was walking through like he's like, I can edit this in the computer. It's like, there's like, what?
Yeah, it's crazy.
But
Yeah, just the feeling that it gives is like I don't know why. That's just like my connection. It's the same with people in music. Like looking at an image of something that's could make me feel a certain way is wild. Um, and to make that and have other people connect to it in the same way is that's why I'm doing it.
yeah, and so you going back to your current role, you mentioned some of the challenges of being globally distributed, team of 700 people. What is the biggest challenge you face in your work, and how do you deal with it?
It's communication always at the end of the day. It's sometimes you're playing telephone, someone wakes up in the UK, they see a message, they have 8 hours to themselves to talk about other things with other people, and then they come back to you with something completely different. So just like wrangling all that information together is hard, and it's great to have tools that help with that. Asana, Figma, Notion, Google Docs, but sometimes having the information spread out in so many different ways and like digital clutter too is hard. And like, who's the point person for that? Who keeps it moving? We have producers on the Oyster brand studio team that help with that for us, but sometimes you're working with teams that don't work like that and it's more ad hoc. And it's just, I mean, I think you're going to run into that stuff anywhere you work, but with us being so distributed, it can sometimes just be like a slog, a little bit sloggy. But to accomplish anything, it's like, okay, this is working, but it's always disorganized, and the end product is always like a celebration of disaster of communication styles. But communication is always the biggest one.
A celebration of the disaster of communication styles. I love that. You're not
Yeah,
alone
as
on
long
that.
as we're like pushing it out, then it's a win.
Yeah, Josh actually calls me a disaster of communication. Um,
I'm sure
the
there's other good things you're really good at, though. That's why
yeah,
you're
for
still
sure.
here.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So building a brand is tough, but that's part of what makes it fun, right? Like, I really do like that. Like you're celebrating it, like what goes into it. What's a time where you took a big risk and it either paid off or just totally flopped and you learned something valuable from it?
At Oyster specifically?
Oh, it could be anywhere, especially if it's the flower skate shop.
Oh my gosh. Probably just agreeing to work there was a mistake. Um, no, but at Oyster, going was a big risk. I'd never done anything like that before. I'd never come to a place where someone was like, "Okay, figure it out." A team of, and we're going from when I joined, it was about 150 people to about five, almost 600 in 6 months to a year. And that was during the pandemic where like the economy really hadn't slowed down yet. And so it was like, here's all the money, just don't even think about it. Um, so yeah, coming here was a risk for me, and eventually it paid off. But this recent refresh that we've gone through, this brand refresh, the history of Oyster was Ragged Edge was a is an agency that worked on this probably 2.5 years ago, but it's not the sort of stuff that you're seeing now. It seemed a little bit dated to me. So yeah, the strategy from Ragged Edge was really great. It's just the visual style was lacking in being fresh. I know that's like a pretty trendy word, but it was great because it allowed the team to build on the strategy, and the foundational elements really good, like what connects us all. And it was a lot of like elements of planet Earth and patterns from water or tree bark or whatever. So a lot of that's infused in the brand, and then obviously elements of like hand drawn um, lines and textures. So thinking about that and refreshing it, we've refreshed it a couple times. This recent one was a risky one because we updated the logo at the same time. We were lucky that Tony Jamis, who is our CEO here, he put out this big vision doc, and the vision doc spoke to this work style brand, which is a combination of basically just a lifestyle brand. He wanted to celebrate work in a way that felt like a lifestyle brand. And so that was huge for us and a big risk because we were doing something that was a little bit more, at this point, I say like cartoony, like kind of childish feeling, and trying to move the company more mid-market, like enterprise, and focus on this work styles brand that he spoke to. But he was all on board right away. Like he trusted us, and we had already like gone through one refresh one time, and so um, we just went from that vision doc, did so much brainstorming, iterations, sharing with stakeholders, and we had a big photo shoot in LA, which was a really quite a big risk. It was like a over 200K shoot for our new photography style that we're now getting like really, 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 really great feedback on. And then an economy where like that stuff is expensive, for them to take a risk and give us the money to do something like that and have some more like human centric, like actual use people in a shoot in a location with makeup folks and art directors was huge and sets us apart from our competitors. And so that's been something we've been rolling out in the past few months, and we're just going to keep building on top of that. So that was probably the riskiest thing that we've done here. Like a refresh is always hard, but this latest one was kind of a big risk, just from a sense of like what we wanted to do was a little bit bigger than we had thought we could do, and we somehow pulled it off with a lot of back and forth with some friends in LA, Jason Yim, the art director here, Stephanie Hune, Michelle Kirk, who y'all have worked with before, and the rest of the Oyster brand studio team here. Yeah, that was probably the biggest risk here.
And you mentioned the vision doc and some of the brand elements. Would you say that there's a unifying just overall philosophy of brand and what makes a good brand that unites you and your team?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that if you talk to any folks, it's always going to come back to like, how do you make this human? In a world of tech, world of technology, how can you humanize this? That's something when I was at Design Studio, it's based out of London. They had an SF office that I worked at. It was always like humanizing these brands that were just engineer-led companies. How can you find that thread of heart and expand on it and allow folks to like feel that instead of just being like, oh, here's a dashboard. So the work style stuff is really celebrating what makes people them, not them work selves, but what do they bring to work? Like Oyster working remote is unlocking all of this stuff for you. So what kind of stuff is that? Like I'm a dad, I play basketball, I draw, I ride my bike, I'm a mom, I do, pottery. And so that's the stuff that within these photographs and work style is like really trying to show that visually. And we've got some fun stuff planned, some videos we've been doing to like actually show the whole person rather than just like I'm sitting at my computer and I'm happy, but you can't see it on my screen. Here's my hands and like, like super stocky. So that in essence of like humanity being put into, especially like an HR company, is something that is really important. And we're glad we saw that from Tony's vision doc, because that's kind of helped bring everything together.
So what do you see as the unique challenges in pushing boundaries? You're talking about some of the risks inherent in just taking on the refresh, but when you think about actually pushing boundaries in the work, what's most challenging about doing that in a fairly established traditional industry overall?
I mean, that's the sort of thing that excites the shit out of me, because like folks aren't really expecting that. And so all you really have to do is look at the competitors and be like, let's not do that. Like, and if the founders are like, yes, don't do that, do something in your particular style or what you think might work for us, then it's like rad, like the co-founder Jack Marduk had reached out to me out of the blue on LinkedIn and was like, I like your style. We want to make something that is kind of like this here. And so that's all I needed to know. And then you do your competitor research, you do some surveys, you start figuring out, what people think of the brand as is. You talk to folks internally about what they think it is. And then it's like, you map that out and then you're like, oh, okay, this is going to work. Like, as long as we don't keep things super stocky and like bland HR, techie blue, like that evokes trust, then I think we'll be in a good position to stand out. And we've done so. Like, we don't look like our competitors. And I think, if anything, some of them are trying to now instill some of our stuff into their stuff, which is great. Like, I love the competitiveness of design. I'm competitive anyways. I played sports growing up, still play basketball, obviously. So it's nice to like be in that world.
Yeah, it's super cool. I can't see your shirt, but what is that?
Oh, it's just this, my friend Derek. There's always someone who's like selling vintage teas. At some point, there's like, now I'm the vintage tea guy, and so this is what he's doing now on the side. And so he tossed me one of these shirts, but it's like this 1988 like holiday classic somewhere I've never been. But
yeah,
he's like, I could get 200 for it, but I'll give it to you for 120.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, cool. Thanks.
So you grew up in the San Fernando Valley. We're about the same age. Are you a Laker fan or a Clippers fan? Don't tell me you're a Warriors fan.
I'm a Lakers fan.
Okay.
I can't. What about you? Can you? You're not going to say Clippers, are you?
Yeah.
It's okay. It's all
right. I know. It's
whatever works for you.
It's a touchy, sensitive subject, but
you might you might have Harden coming to the team soon. That might be able to get.
Yeah, that'd be pretty cool. Yeah, us Clippers fans are just gluttons for punishment, but who knows? Maybe our grandkids will see them win a title or something.
I love that Lamar Odom, Quinn Richardson team. That team was awesome. The headband bumping and Darius Miles. I think I had a poster up in my room from Slam. You remember that magazine Slam?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Dude, Darius Miles. Haven't thought about that name in a while.
I was just at a pizza place in Colorado that had the original NBA Jam arcade game. That was awesome. So I grew up as a Nuggets fan, so this was like the first year of any redemption.
Look at you. You're alive. You're thriving this year.
That was fun.
Except you lost a couple
old school NBA Jam.
Lost a couple big names this offseason, so I'm sorry.
I'll be okay. I think a good way to relate to sports is like just to not have any emotional investment in it, and then like if they win, then that's cool. But if they lose, I don't want to be like screaming at my kids that day or something.
Well, we're older now. Like, you can't do that anymore.
Jay's got a Nuggets tattoo on his chest.
Do you really?
No.
It's Dikembe Mutombo wagging his finger.
Oh man, that'd be awesome. I forgot that he was on the team.
It moves anytime I bounce my pecs,
Show us.
Do it live. PG
for the pod.
PG
for the pod, man.
For the pod.
All right, I'll go back to the questions.
Okay.
Cool. So you touched on some of the works in progress with respect to the photography style. What's something that your team is just like really excited about that they're working on that's coming down the pipeline? Is that it? And can you unpack that a bit more, or is it something else?
Yeah, it's all the refresh stuff. We just put out this work style quiz. So if you see this on LinkedIn, go check it out. I'm the achiever. I'm somehow juggling all this different stuff while still being somewhat productive and on podcasts. But yeah, it's a fun little like brand awareness quiz. We're also going to be celebrating the brand refresh stuff, and we are looking to do maybe a global campaign. We're still figuring out planning for that, and maybe like a bigger activation piece somewhere. We've also got some customer story videos, which seems like a no-brainer, like, duh, you should be doing that stuff, but we're still in the planning phase. So the out-of-home campaign in like the UK could be sick. I'm looking forward to that. I think the team would be looking forward to that too. Just seeing your stuff on a billboard is always like, that's the top top design. It's like seeing my dad's Batman poster on the freeway. You're like, whoa. So stuff like that is what's coming down the pipe, and hopefully budget's good, which is always at the end of the day you need money. We should be seeing that some point this year.
Yeah, that's really cool. So for someone in your role, your kind of role, which is a pretty senior role, you're working with a lot of different team members, making sure everyone's aligned, kind of singing from the same page of the hymn book, so to speak, right? I presume it's sometimes hard to get like really hands-on on a project level. Are there certain things that you just like really love to get your hands dirty with still, and you're able to? And if so, what kind of things are they?
The swag shop, the swag shop we're about to put up, like it's something that needs to be designed, but like there's other like bigger things going on. And so we kind of paused on swag for a while, and we're about to have our store come out in the next couple weeks. So anybody can check it out, grab a shirt, grab a hat, grab a tote. But that's something that I love web design. Like I said, I used to be a web developer and code front end style guides for places when I was at design studios like for Chick-fil-A or Twitter. So I have that in me. So I love designing in web and anything animation. Like I love animating. There's a curiosity to me that like I'll be like, oh, I like animation, and then someone that I work with is like, why don't you take this course? I'm like, okay, and then I take a course, and then I'm really good at animating, but like I can also have this other stuff. So web design and animation is just one thing that if I can touch that stuff, I throw on my headphones, throw on some jams, and just like get into that world, which is the best. Like that's where everybody wants to be. It's when you're out of that sometimes. It's just like, is this design? No, I'm just directing. Okay, this is fun too. It's a different challenge.
Yeah. So our podcast is called Best Story Wins. And that is because ultimately we believe that brand or story is the best way for a company to differentiate and then compete and then win customers' hearts and minds. In your opinion, what do you think the keys are to telling a great brand story?
First and foremost, you got to start with the heart, the human aspect of it, and then why that feeling is making you. So let's say we're talking about someone working remotely. Like, in my opinion, the great brands that tell the great stories is always you're speaking to the heart, and it's a little bit weird, a little bit abstract. It's not just someone sitting in their house at the computer. Like, is it someone that's running from the bulls and like they're stopping and they're chatting on their computer doing some quick work because your work is so flexible that can exist. So you're speaking to someone's hobby, their passion, their heart. Work's infused, but it's not quite everything. And then you throw some action in it. Maybe that's just one part of the story. They're off doing something else. But like these are sort of the ideas I think of that like the MailChimps of the world have done. Super off the wall, which is sort of hard to sell sometimes to folks in a traditional like tech world that are like, what does this have to do with anything? How do we measure this? You're like, you can't. You kind of can with clicks on the website. No, there's obviously more things you can do, but yeah, that's the stuff that's going to get people talking. Like it's the stopping in your steps because there's an ad that makes you think, and there's a weird, but and it has like some messaging that feels personal to you or whatever you're going through. That's always like the most successful thing, but the hardest to do because it requires a lot more effort, a lot more brainstorming. There's not a lot of time in the day. So I applaud those places like the MailChimps that they had one campaign that was completely absurd. It was like a whole 3D world online that you could like check out historical internet. I don't know if you remember this thing they did, but you could walk up to an old Mac laptop and click it and something would expand and twist around and it just gave you the history of the Mac laptop. But it wasn't getting anything from you. I didn't have to enter my email. I didn't have to do anything. But it was like probably $300,000 to do if like, and then how do you measure that? You don't. So, or the Mail Shrimp campaign. Remember they did that? Hmm. They've had some good ones. Like, what is this? That's the kind of stuff that I like, and hopefully want to do that here more. It's just time, budget, and selling. It's always the roadblock.
Yeah. I think one way to measure if a brand campaign is effective is, do people mention it on a podcast years later?
Well, I just mentioned two of MailChimp. So.
Yeah, right?
Yeah,
but there's something to be said about things sticking with you, right? And like leaving a mark. And when you think about how people do something well, that example comes to mind. And obviously that's a hard thing to base a request for $1 million on, maybe talking to a C-suite, but right. If you get it, like you get it, right?
Yeah, and you better do it good. It better be memorable.
Yeah, for sure. Well, what are some of the ways that your team is telling your story in ways that are interesting or unique or super effective?
Yeah, I think the stuff like the work style quiz, we're we've just gone through this refresh and now we're like, okay, what kind of stuff we can do? The quiz, easy win, a lot more like animations, and using some taglines and slogans and throwing into our social feeds. I don't know what social feeds working anymore. You got Blue Sky, Threads, Twitter, Instagram. It's like which one's getting LinkedIn's like the most secure one at this point, but making sure that we're like throwing in interesting ads here and there in between, like, oh, our brand helped this partner by X percentage. Just making sure to stay a little bit interesting and not as like a meme brand, but like actually using our content that we talk about for URs or folks that are hiring in a way that's just interesting. And that could just be like some kinetic type, like that stuff is super sexy and that gets people to stop and look at your stuff. So just making sure that like we don't lose sight of that and it's not just like cookie cutter stats. That's what the folks on my team just get excited about. And you got to make sure that like you're giving them stuff like that, or else it just becomes, as you know, it can just become the grind. We're just pooping out ads that look the same all the time. So trying to infuse some of the weirdness in our day-to-day work is a big one. We always make sure to ask folks if they have campaign ideas, even if they're small. We have like a laundry list of weird campaigns, off the wall campaigns that we might be able to achieve at some point. So just making sure that like they feel heard and seen and their ideas matter as a open collaborative environment is like really important. And I think it's kind of working.
Yeah, that's really cool. So in addition to like looking at, the various metrics like clicks and views and so forth, does your team have a feedback loop to understand like how the story is resonating with the people you're trying to reach? If so, what does that look like?
We have a PR team here that help us with anything that might go out. whether it be from the founders or from someone like me or someone else across teams that can kind of measure that brand awareness stuff. We have a brand health index, which is interesting. It's like an aggregate of clicks from the website, heat maps, to like PR, to brand impressions on social. And we measure that by quarter and have like this percentage base that hopefully is going up by a few percentage every month. Boring stuff, but like you can see that all these aggregates things together, this funnels in to create this brand health score. I won't take credit for that. An older head of marketing, Kevin Lee, implemented that, and I think it's really cool. It's the first time I've seen something like that at a place I've worked at this position I'm in, and it just it's nice to see all the different levers come together to like make sure like yes we are doing well, and combined with like pipeline, we're doing really well. So that, and then we have brand surveys that we put out every quarter. We ask about Oyster compared to our competitors, how Oyster makes folks feel, and so just like having that high level sense of the brand health score with feedback loops from the surveys to feedback loops internally help us see like how we're doing. And obviously like there's brand metrics tied to things like landing pages, signups, clicks, that we use for stuff too.
You mentioned earlier that you'll sometimes look at other brands in your industry and just be like, okay, just don't do that. What are some other mistakes you see brands making when they're trying to reach customers effectively?
Oh my God, the linear website that's spawned off all these copies of other sites, or like when Stripe came out, like that's it's just the copycat stuff. And especially if you're like a smaller brand looking to have an impactful identity, and you just look at the same Stripe or linear and you just copycat everything, that's not going to help. Like it might help for a month or so, but then once everybody piles onto that, then it's kind of over. And so like finding a sweet spot in between newer looking stuff and looking to the past is, especially looking in the past, is going to help out. We had Elizabeth Goodspeed, who is kind of she looks at trends from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s and collects them on a place called Arena. Do you guys use Arena at all? It's like Pinterest, but cooler. And she does a really good archiving. She's sort of an archivist of brands. And so having folks like that come in and explain how that's, her work has affected brands that we see out in the world now, and like older past 60s, 70s work affect the way a really good brand looks now, like kind of helped us think about how we could look to the past and build for the future instead of just like looking what's trending now and just piling on top of that.
What is the URL for Arena?
It's ARE period NA.
Oh, okay. It's a tricky one to just Google search.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a Tumblr-esque type collection place. And it's like very minimal. There's no ads. It's awesome.
Yeah. So that's a really interesting place to look, when you think, especially for a tech brand, to be looking to the past for inspiration. Is there some specific projects or designers that you've looked to? You mentioned those thick advertising books and coffee table books that you grew up with. Is there something like a technique or something that you saw, especially like a marketing tactic from the past, that you feel like can be applied today?
I think just anything Swiss always wins. Like as long as you have if you have your type down, you're usually going to be good. That's a big area that like is overlooked, I think. Like type hierarchy and layout, and like Swiss is always the best. So looking back into old advertisements like that, just even for layout, just or even like 70s advertisements, they're always fun and weird and have large photos of people with big type next to them. I think that stuff is always fantastic. Um, but yeah, the type is everything, and so as long as we have Natalie Harris is on the team here, and she did a program at Cooper, and just developed some typefaces for us, and she developed the mark, the new Oyster mark for us, which is beautiful. People that understand type, like, you're going to be good. I've worked with some really cool folks in my time, and that's always like the number one thing to me.
Yeah. So looking to the future a bit, obviously everyone is talking about the economy everywhere you look, everywhere you go. And you'd be lying if you said it wasn't in flux, right? So how does the shift in the marketplace, the shift in the economy, how does that impact your team in terms of the budgets you're able to acquire, or the strategies you're using, the tactics you're using?
Yeah, it's we, you know, we've been through the ringer like every other tech company, and we've been in our battles, and it's difficult. I think you just have to make sure you're doing things with the team that feel like they're still expressing their creativity in ways that feel fun, and making sure that it you really have to, as as a designer, like, I never really thought about that stuff coming up. Like, how are you going to think about budget, scope, changing and pivoting mid, second month in because something's going to be too expensive, you don't have it. And now you're in this position, and I think a lot of folks on the team now, so I'm pretty open and transparent with folks, like bringing them along on that process to see like how things actually come together. It might not always happen here, but like they're going to have that experience moving forward, and it's making, I think all designers should have a good sense of business a little bit at this point, so you're not completely caught off guard, to just be able to be more strategic as they grow in their career. Like, so it's really the learning process for us. It's a chance to, okay, well, we can't do this. Let's put our heads together and brainstorm and do this. And I think that challenge is pretty special. Like, as bad as things are, it's you're gonna have to like be a better designer, because you're gonna have to think differently about making things and why you're gonna make them. If you have the context, that's great. Usually, like, coming up, you wouldn't be in the room with folks planning. You would just be handed a brief and you just got to make the shit. But now it's different. They're in there, they're looking at briefs, they're thinking about our problems, they're thinking about our business. So it's kind of an interesting and creative way to use your brain, and not just visually, that I think will in the long term be helpful.
So how is AI playing a role in how you're thinking about your team creating content? Are you for it, against it, curious? How are you seeing it?
Yeah, it's a scary time. I think it should be complementing, not replacing. This brand's all about being human centric. I'm not looking to replace any designers with Mid-Journey. Like, that's not what we're trying to do. If anything, I keep bringing up just up an example to folks because I talk about AI with people all the time, but like Photoshop's always had actions, like you could record your action and then it would batch it and do it for you. Like, AI has been around. And so like now it's just got a sexier interface and can do a multitude of different things rather than just the one thing. So I was a little bit scared of it at first, but the team's been tinkering around with like, okay, if we're going to use AI, how are we going to do it? How can we ethically use it? Maybe it's coming up with a name for a new chatbot. Like, let's come up with some ideas, throw that into ChatGPT, see if they can grind out some ideas for us real quick, and then iterate on that. If we're thinking about a video, instead of using my shitty sketches for storyboarding, like, maybe I can use Midjourney and think of that storyboard beforehand, so that when we actually use human beings to do the shoot, or 3D artists or whatever, there's more of a jump off point and you can sell faster to your stakeholders in the beginning rather than here's my crappy sketch and they're like, I really can't see like why I would give you this amount of money for this. And you're like, okay, like then you iterate on that for weeks. Now I haven't done this yet, but I want to like put together a storyboard with images from Midjourney that tell that story of the person running from the bulls or whatever, and have that be your selling. If you can use it to sell, that's great. But I think it's always going to come down to humans making this stuff, especially in an HR company. Like I'm not about to fucking use Midjourney for all our blog posts and then speak to like we love people, we're all about people centric. Like it just seems a little bit backwards to do something like that. So
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I think there's definitely some brands, and I mean, I think individuals too who will look at this and go, it's like the kind of return to small batch handcrafted goods in general too, that where people are like, yeah, that's great. I know like a factory, robot could make that cheaper, but I like that this person over here made it with care and quality. So I think there's always going to be people in that camp, but it's interesting. I think you're the first person we've talked to who had like a very compelling reason for their brand not to at least be like publishing AI stuff, using it a bit more in the background or as a complement rather than a replacement. So I think where a lot of people are landing kind of currently, at least, it's going to be interesting as that quality, obviously that most recent version of Midjourney at this point, 5.2, it's taken a pretty huge leap. Um, I think it's you're still not seeing a ton of at least obvious content marketing being done with like obvious images from Midjourney. I think it's because there's still, it's like near perfect, but there's still always something off. But I wonder when that gets like actually, perfect images. I guess it'll be harder to detect too.
it's really comes down to the brands. Yeah, like if you've got Nikes of the world being like, you know what, let's just rip the lid off this. Like, here you go. And then other, the smaller folks are like, well, if they're doing it, then we're doing it. We might be like 6 months away from that happening. We have no idea, especially if the economy keeps going the way it is. Like, and every company is just trying to focus on revenue because their targets are high because they were super high during the pandemic and now things are slowing down. And so, how do you keep moving forward with all the profits? With people are expensive. Does a company care about people or they care about profits? They can care about both, but yeah, what's that like handcrafted thing? Like you're going to be able to tell the difference. Um, but some of the stuff, have you heard of nerfs before? Have you seen that stuff happening yet?
Oh, I can imagine what you're getting at, but go for it.
Well, like, I'm always speaking to what does your home look like? What's the inside look like? How can we celebrate like what your space looks like? And now you can use your phone to like take 50 photos. You just walk around taking photos, and then AI creates this like digital 3D world of the actual inside of your house that you can like if you've ever used like Redfin or Matterport, they have that camera they put around. You can do that just with your phone now, which is rad. Like I could build a campaign off that where you celebrate people's workspaces inside their house. Um, I haven't yet, but that stuff, if the human's still like taking the photo and going around, I think that's okay. But like if you're just asking AI to create a 3D model inside of someone's home, looking like whatever your prompt says, like some interior designer, then it's just a blatant ripoff, and that's where I kind of draw the line.
Yeah, I mean, there's an analog to that just in anyone's work, right? Like you mentioned the example of people just ripping off Stripe's site and not being original. There's almost like there's this its own like punishment in the market for being unoriginal sometimes, right? But yeah, there. It's interesting to think about at what point something you're making in an AI there's like obviously a burgeoning world of AI art, and some people would like challenge whether or not that's actually art, right? But like at what point of iteration and feeding back into it your own work or whatever, like at what point do you cross over into it actually being original? I think is really interesting, like to take that question and think about that for brands too, right? Like if you're feeding in your own illustrations into a private model, and it's your concepts that are being iterated on auto magically or whatever, maybe there's something to that, right? Like extending on your own human designed foundation. How do you relate to that idea of like kind of using AI to extend the visual identity? Obviously, it won't handle your type hierarchy yet, but
Yeah, something might come. I've thought about that for sure. I've gotten the team to be like, okay, sign up for Runway, sign up for Midjourney, tinker, like throw in some of the stuff, like what can Photoshop beta generate? Like if we give them a photo we took, that's it. Yeah, that's the tricky part. It's like if you put that in there and you say expand this image and it creates it for you, what even is that? Like what from a copyright perspective, what have you now created? Have and then the people that did the shoot, they got to put in there now, like make sure you're not using AI to generate stuff beyond the frame. Like it's a whole strategy that uh, I don't want to think about, but I think everybody should be thinking about, especially artists. Um, there's already stuff in clauses like this can only be used for a year, 2 years, whatever before. Um, but now I'm thinking about how that impacts it. Sure, I don't know. We haven't done anything like that. We've come up with some weird experiments where like it's so terrible that we wouldn't use it, but that might change soon. Yeah, if we have a bank of photos, we're like, oh, we want to expand on this. I don't know. It still feels bad. Still feels bad.
Yeah, you reminded me of that that video that went viral a few months ago. It was a video created entirely by AI, and it was like a pizza restaurant's
Yeah,
advertisement.
I
Do you know what
saw
I'm
that.
talking about? It's so
I
bad,
love
right?
those ones. They're hilarious.
It's like more family, more cheese, I think was like the
Yeah,
tagline.
all their
And it's
mouth
actually
sounds.
not that bad. It's like not, yeah, their mouths are all crazy, but it was like from a copyright perspective, like it's actually not that bad.
No,
More
it's
family,
funny,
more
and people
cheese.
are going to be talking about it.
Yeah, we're talking about it right now, right?
Yeah.
Well, I know we're pretty much at the end of our time together. Any final tips or thoughts you want to share with our listeners?
Oh God, I think just stay curious. Um, Stay curious. Experiment a lot. Like experiment constantly. I think the biggest growth I had in my career is the last thing I'll say is I think 1 year I tried to create something every week. Sometimes people do something every day, and sometimes I would do something every day. But like, if you're into 3D, how does that work with something that's more like web design? Like, how can you start like morphing these things together? And they might be really bad, but like, it's the process of understanding the tool and using your own creative vision to then all of a sudden something starts clicking. And I like halfway into that process, I was like, oh shit, I think I'm finding out a way that I can express myself that feels true to me. And that now goes with AI too. Like if you want to use AI, sure, but don't just put in the prompt and like say it's yours. Like I started using Runway and their frame interpolation thing for some animations, but I set up my storyboard in Figma, exported the stuff, and then it starts morphing the I don't know if you all have used that, but like that's something that I'm like, oh, now that I know that exists, that might work for this particular thing on a project that just came up. And that's just like for me, design and being curious and creating is about that. It's just kind of like I love fucking around, and like doing enough of that will make you more hireable and have more interesting like perspective on things as long as you keep doing it.
Yeah, that's great advice. Justin, it's been so great having you on. I really enjoyed this conversation. If people want to learn more about you and follow you, where's the best place for them to find you online or to learn more about Oyster?
Yeah, oysterhr.com. That's our website. Social networks, like I said, find me on Blue Sky. No, I'm on Twitter as JRizPop, I think. But that's always around. Twitter hasn't died yet, but yeah, you can just Google me.
Awesome, cool. And it's Justin Rands from Oyster HR, or just Oyster. Thanks again.
Thanks, Justin.
Nice talking to y'all.
Column 5's Best Story Wins is for marketing and branding professionals looking to unlock their growth potential. Each episode features a conversation with industry leaders about how they win the hearts and minds of their customers and build world-class brands. You'll learn about their success stories and their failures, as well as ideas for how to take your own marketing efforts to the next level. Welcome to Best Story Wins.